Human Rights Watch held a seminar with Olympic athletes. During the meeting, the group instructed them not to speak out about China's human rights abuses while they're competing at the Beijing Winter Olympics. That's because the athletes won't have much protection while they're inside the communist country. The Beijing Winter Olympics is next month, and according to the U.S. State Department, China is committing genocide against its Uyghur ethnic minority. But athletes are being warned not to draw attention to human rights issues at the Games. The director of an athlete advocacy group explains why.
One of the reasons we came out with a statement last week or earlier this week advising athletes not to speak up, which is absolutely ridiculous that we're telling athletes to be quiet and to leave and to get home. And the reason being is Rule 50, if you go through the rule, it says under the applicable laws of the country. While we know the human rights record and the allowance of freedom of expression in China, so there's really not much protection that we believe that's going to be afforded to athletes.
Rule 50 of the Olympic Charter forbids athletes from making any kind of political or religious demonstration at the Games, though some athletes say they should be allowed to speak out on issues that matter to them, be it at the Olympics or elsewhere.
There should be blanket protection for any athletes that speak up at any time about issues of human rights. Athletes don't only enjoy human rights when they're not competing. Athletes don't only enjoy human rights when they're not on the podium. They enjoy human rights at all times. And so, yes, athletes should be protected when they're not on the podium and not on the field of play, but they should be protected when they're in those places as well.
A researcher for Human Rights Watch who focuses on China explains how athletes could be in jeopardy if they don't heed the warning.
And the Chinese laws are very, vague on the crimes they can use to prosecute people's free speech. You can be charged with picking quarrels and provoking trouble for speaking up. You can be charged for inciting subversion. So there are all kinds of crimes can be leveled for your peaceful, critical comments. And as Sophie mentioned earlier, China's conviction rate is 99%. All those, facts are a good indicator of what could happen to athletes if they decide to speak up.
Reuters contacted the International Olympic Committee for comment. The IOC emailed the outlet saying the Olympic body always recognizes and upholds human rights as enshrined in both the fundamental principles of the Olympic Charter and in its code of ethics. The U.S., along with Japan, Britain, and Australia, have staged diplomatic boycotts of the Games. The countries have cited the ruling Communist Party's human rights abuses.
Are the uniforms for the upcoming Beijing Winter Olympics linked to forced labor in the Xinjiang region? The International Olympic Committee, or IOC, said on Wednesday, no. The statement comes after a U.S. government agency probed the IOC on the issue. The Congressional Executive Commission on China said the IOC has partnered with Chinese companies to make uniforms that use cotton from the Xinjiang region. The commission says the U.S. now presumes that goods sourced in Xinjiang are made with forced labor, and that cotton produced there is synonymous with forced labor. One of the Chinese companies that the IOC partners with had reportedly quit the Better Cotton Initiative group. That group is a nonprofit which promotes sustainable cotton production. It previously pulled out of Xinjiang, citing increasing risks of forced labor. The IOC's other partner has a factory in Xinjiang and openly advertises products that contain cotton produced there. The U.S. agency says that because the Chinese companies use Xinjiang goods, there is a worrisome possibility that IOC personnel or others attending the 2022 Olympic Games will be wearing clothing contaminated by forced labor. When the U.S. announced a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Olympics last month, it pointed to human rights abuses in China as the reason, including Beijing's suppression of Uyghurs in the Xinjiang region. And Beijing, as usual, denied any accusation of this kind. But this is not the only way the communist regime tries to whitewash itself. It seems to be buying influence on social media, too. Recently, a large number of zombie accounts appeared on Twitter, and all used the same script to deny accusations of human rights abuses in Xinjiang, a region in China's northwest. Most of these accounts use English names, and their ID seems to be part of their Twitter handle. And many of the accounts are new. They have no followers, and they follow no one, typical features of zombie accounts. The tweet template begins, "I grew up in Xinjiang," and accuses the U.S. and other countries of creating lies about human rights abuses to hurt China. The tweet then links to a report of a Chinese Communist Party media's article. This article is an interview with a person from Xinjiang who says they've been living in the United Arab Emirates for 15 years. The linked website oceannet.com says on its official page that it is a Paris-based Chinese language outlet. However, internet user tests show its server is in California, and the website domain's Internet Cache Protocol was filed in Beijing. The Chinese Communist regime invests a lot in influencing opinions. Late last month, the New York Times published an investigative report titled Buying Influence: How China Manipulates Facebook and Twitter. It detailed how Beijing floods social media platforms worldwide with fake accounts made by private contractors as its campaign of social media manipulation. A newly released financial record is putting a U.S. health expert in the spotlight. The controversy revolves around Dr. Anthony Fauci. His recent financial disclosure shows the doctor has significant investments in Chinese companies. According to Fauci's 2020 financial statement, first released by U.S. Senator Roger Marshall on Friday, Fauci held approximately $10 million in investments, including in a particular fund named the Matthews Pacific Tiger Fund. According to the fund's fact sheet, nearly half of this money went into companies based in China and Hong Kong. Many of them are linked to Beijing and benefit from its policies. Included are tech company Tencent, online shopping giant Alibaba, Hong Kong Exchange and Clearing, and drug developer WuXi Biologics. Among them, Tencent has been known to comply with the Chinese regime's demands, like collecting users' personal data, monitoring online activity, and censorship. Those practices also extend outside China to U.S.-based and other international users of its messaging app WeChat. Besides Tencent, Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba has been accused of cybersecurity risks and espionage by U.S. investigators. For Fauci, the disclosed financial information comes at a hectic time. That's amid dwindling public trust in his handling of the pandemic as chief medical advisor to Biden. Last week, the Senate summoned Fauci to a hearing over suggestions that he lied to Congress about his gain-of-function work. The controversy continued this week after Senator Roger Marshall accused Fauci of lying on another occasion, this time on his finances. In a statement, Marshall wrote, just like he has misled the American people about gain-of-function research, about masks, testing, and more, Dr. Fauci was completely dishonest about his financial disclosures being open to the public. Previously, Fauci claimed he had made his earnings public for nearly 4 decades.
The top chip machine maker still doesn't have permission to export its newest machines to China. That's according to its CEO.
The Dutch company ASML is the only one in the world that can manufacture the machines used to make the most advanced chips. Under pressure from the U.S., the Dutch government still hasn't granted a license to ASML to export the machines to China. There are concerns that the machines could be used in military applications. The company's CEO says he doesn't think China can replicate the technology because ASML relies on innovation and parts from non-Chinese suppliers. Experts think it could take a decade before another company could compete with ASML's chip-making technology.
Facing Beijing's trade curb against Lithuania, Taiwan again reached out to offer a helping hand. A container of milk-based product will be turned into milk tea to make the friendship that much sweeter.
Taiwan again reaching out to Lithuania, this time with a container of evaporated milk. The Chinese Communist Party has been retaliating against Lithuania's support for Taiwan, but it seems Taiwan has Lithuania's back. Chinese customs recently blocked a container of Lithuanian milk, which drifted at sea for more than 2 months. A Taiwanese food company run by a Hong Konger then took over the container at the end of December. The product will now be made into milk tea and launched in the Taiwanese market. And the package will be designed with colors from the Lithuanian national flag, yellow, green, and red. The buyer is Taiwan's Goodland Food and Tech.
It just so happens that we have the need, and then there is no place for this container to land. And what I heard was that it was ignored, and Chinese customs ignored the container.
He said the labels for the milk package were originally made for Chinese customers, and the Lithuanian company will remake them for the Taiwanese market. Mr. Dong is from Hong Kong and has lived in Taiwan for 3 decades. He says Hong Kong has changed for the worse under Chinese Communist Party rule. Last November, Taiwan established a Taiwanese representative office in Lithuania. Since then, the Chinese Communist regime began to give Lithuania a hard time, especially in trade. Lithuania is not alone in the fight against the Chinese Communist Party. Not only Taiwan, but also the U.S. and European Union showed their support for Lithuania.
The 2022 Winter Olympics are slated to begin next week in Beijing, but calls to boycott the event are still running high. At a recent press conference, Florida Senator Rick Scott publicly condemned the Chinese Communist Party's human rights abuses.
It is a fact that the Communist Chinese Party is committing horrific human rights abuses against Tibetans, Hong Kongers, and Uyghur Muslims. It is a fact that the Communist Chinese Party is committing genocide and desecrating the Uyghur homeland.
Ahead of the Beijing Winter Olympics, Senator Rick Scott issued a sharp reprimand over the Chinese Communist Party's human rights violations. He called the regime's treatment of its own athletes alarming, citing former Grand Slam tennis doubles champion Peng Shuai. She dropped out of sight in late 2021 after publicly accusing a top Chinese Communist Party official of sexual assault.
I can't tell you how worried I am about the athletes competing in Beijing. Look at what Communist China did to silence and disappear Peng Shuai. It's terrifying. I've called on the IOC and the Biden administration to take every step necessary to keep Americans safe. But unfortunately, I haven't heard a word from them on what they're doing about it.
Out of concern for Peng's safety, the Women's Tennis Association suspended its activities in China, while a number of athletes around the world have expressed support for her. Since then, growing opposition to Beijing's hosting of the Olympics has been on the rise, led by human rights advocates and U.S. lawmakers.
The CCP's authoritarian behavior and repressive policies against Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, and Tibetans cannot be normalized. Any form of participation in the upcoming 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics is equivalent to endorsing its escalating atrocities. And any form of appeasement policy is no different than allowing China to continue its oppression, and even inviting it to our backyards.
The White House last month has officially announced a diplomatic boycott of the upcoming Winter Games. Beijing vowed to meet the move with firm countermeasures.